There's a photograph that Meryl Streep has never shown to anyone outside her immediate family. It sits in a small wooden box in her bedroom, tucked beneath old letters and theater programs from her early years in New York. The photograph is from 1978, taken by someone whose name she can no longer remember, at a party she attended 3 weeks after John Cazale died. In the image, she's smiling, a wide, bright smile that reaches her eyes. She's wearing a black dress and holding a glass of wine, surrounded by people who are laughing at something someone just said. She looks happy, radiant, even, beautiful and young and full of life. But Meryl knows the truth that the camera couldn't capture. She was dying inside. She'd gone to that party because her agent told her she needed to be seen, needed to show the industry she was still working, still available, still viable. So she'd put on the dress and the smile and performed the role of a woman who was okay. And she'd done it so well that even the camera believed her. That photograph represents the moment Meryl Streep understood the most dangerous thing about being a great actress: sometimes you're so good at pretending that you forget you're pretending at all. The weeks after John's death had been a blur of grief and obligation. She'd finished filming The Deer Hunter while he was dying, had held his hand between takes, had watched the man she loved disappear piece by piece while she was playing a woman in love on screen. The boundaries between performance and reality had dissolved completely. She didn't know where her grief ended and her characters began. She didn't know if she was crying for John or for the story or for herself. Everything had become mixed up, tangled, impossible to separate. When he died in March, the world didn't stop. That's what shocked her most. She thought, somehow, irrationally, that when something this catastrophic happened, there would be some kind of pause. Some acknowledgement from the universe that everything had changed. But the sun kept rising. People kept going to work. Her agent kept calling with offers and updates. The machinery of Hollywood kept churning, indifferent to her devastation. She'd moved out of the apartment she'd shared with John immediately. Couldn't bear to be there, surrounded by his things, his smell, the shape of his absence. She stayed with her brother Harry and his wife in their small apartment, sleeping on their couch, trying to figure out what came next. Her brother was gentle with her, never pushing, never asking her to be anything other than what she was. But even there, even surrounded by family, she felt profoundly alone. The loneliness wasn't about being physically alone. It was about the gap between how she appeared and how she felt. Everyone saw her as strong, resilient, admirably professional. They'd comment on how well she was handling everything, how impressive it was that she was still working, still showing up. And she'd smile and thank them and feel the distance between their perception and her reality growing wider every day. The party where the photograph was taken happened because her agent insisted. There was Oscar buzz around The Deer Hunter. She needed to be visible, to remind people she existed, to network with producers and directors who might cast her in future projects. "I know the timing is terrible," her agent had said on the phone, his voice careful. "But this is your moment. You can't let it pass by." So she'd gone. Put on the black dress, the only formal thing she owned that wasn't connected to memories of John. Did her makeup in her brother's bathroom mirror, her hands shaking so badly she had to redo her eyeliner 3 times. Took a cab to a house in the Hollywood Hills where people with money and power gathered to see and be seen. The party was exactly what she'd expected and somehow worse. Everyone was beautiful and ambitious and hungry. Conversations were transactions. Compliments were investments. She could feel people calculating her worth, deciding whether she was worth knowing, worth remembering, worth calling when they needed someone for a project. She was 29 years old and 3 weeks into grief that felt like it would never end, and she was supposed to be charming. She got a glass of wine and found a corner and tried to become invisible. But being invisible wasn't an option. People recognized her. They wanted to talk about The Deer Hunter, about her performance, about whether she thought she'd be nominated. One man, a producer whose name she immediately forgot, told her she had real star quality and handed her his card. A woman in a silver dress asked if she was seeing anyone, then looked embarrassed when she remembered about John and said, "Oh God, I'm so sorry, I forgot." "How do you forget?" Meryl had wanted to scream. How does anyone forget that someone died? But she didn't scream. She smiled and said it was fine and excused herself to get another drink. In the kitchen, a famous director was holding court, telling a story that had everyone laughing. She stood on the edge of the group, glass in hand, and laughed when everyone else laughed even though she hadn't heard the joke. This was the performance. This was what survival looked like. That's when the photograph was taken. Someone with a camera, maybe a photographer hired for the party, maybe just someone documenting the evening, captured her in that moment of false happiness. And she looked so convincing that when she saw the photo weeks later, forwarded to her agent's office, she almost didn't recognize herself. Who was that woman? That radiant, confident woman who looked like she had everything figured out? The photograph haunted her. She kept it, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe as evidence. Proof that she could fragment herself so completely that even a camera couldn't see the cracks. Proof that she was exactly what she'd always feared becoming, someone who was better at performing life than living it. The Oscar nomination came in January 1979. She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress for The Deer Hunter. Everyone was thrilled for her. Congratulations poured in. Her agent talked about what this meant for her career, the doors it would open, the offers that would come. And Meryl felt nothing. Or rather, she felt something, but it was complicated and dark and impossible to explain to people who thought this was purely good news. John would never be nominated for anything again. John would never make another film. John was gone, and she was being celebrated for a movie she'd only been in because she'd fought to keep him employed while he was dying. The whole thing felt wrong. Contaminated. Like she was benefiting from his death in some terrible cosmic exchange. She went to the ceremony in April. Wore a dress someone else picked out. Smiled for cameras. Gave interviews where she said all the right things about being honored and grateful. She didn't win, the award went to Maggie Smith for California Suite, and she felt relief more than disappointment. Winning would have been too much. Would have required a speech, a moment of public emotion, a performance of gratitude she wasn't capable of giving. After the ceremony, there were parties. More parties. Always more parties. She went to one and then another and then found herself at 3 in the morning in someone's living room in Beverly Hills, surrounded by people she didn't know, feeling like she was watching her life from outside her own body. A young actor was flirting with her. A producer was asking if she'd read a script he'd sent her agent. Someone put a drink in her hand. Someone else asked if she was having fun. Was she having fun? She genuinely couldn't tell. She left without saying goodbye to anyone and walked outside into the cool Los Angeles night. The city was never fully dark, never fully quiet. She could hear traffic in the distance, music from other parties, the hum of a city that never stopped performing. She sat on the curb in her expensive dress and thought about getting in a cab and going to the airport and buying a ticket to anywhere else. Just disappearing. Becoming someone else. Starting over in a place where no one knew her name or her face or her grief. But she didn't. She went back to her hotel, and in the morning, she flew to New York. New York felt different. New York had been hers and John's. Their city. The place where they'd built a life together, small and beautiful and real. Coming back was painful, but it was honest pain. Not the performed grief of Los Angeles, where everyone wanted the sanitized, marketable version of her sadness. In New York, she could walk through the streets where they'd walked together and feel the full weight of his absence without having to explain it or package it or make it palatable for people who saw her loss as narrative background. She went to the theater where she'd performed before John got sick. Sat in the empty audience and remembered what it felt like to act for the love of acting, not for fame or money or career advancement. Theater was immediate and unrepeatable. Every performance was different. Every audience was different. There was no camera to lie to, no edit to hide behind. Just you and the words and the people watching, all of you in the same room, breathing the same air, sharing the same moment. That's when she started to understand what had gone wrong. She'd confused success with survival. She'd thought that working constantly, saying yes to everything, being visible and professional and impressive would somehow save her from grief. But it hadn't. It had just covered the grief with layers of performance until she couldn't find herself underneath. She started saying no. Not to everything, she wasn't ready to walk away completely. But she became selective. She turned down films that would have been good for her career but required her to be in Los Angeles for months. She chose projects that let her stay in New York, close to the life she was trying to rebuild. She stopped going to parties where she had to perform happiness. She stopped pretending that being nominated for awards filled the hole John's death had left. Her agent worried. Producers called her difficult. People in the industry started whispering that she was wasting her moment, that you can't turn down opportunities in Hollywood and expect them to keep coming. But Meryl was done caring about what the industry wanted from her. She cared about what she wanted from herself. In September 1978, she married Don Gummer. It was sudden, they'd known each other only a few months. People judged her for moving on so quickly. How could she be in love again so soon after John? How could she marry someone else when John's death was so recent? The judgment stung, but she didn't try to explain. How do you tell people that Don wasn't a replacement but a lifeline? That he offered stability and safety and a kind of love that didn't require her to be extraordinary? That she needed someone who saw her as a person, not as talent or potential or an asset to be managed? Don was a sculptor. He understood the creative process but existed outside the Hollywood machinery. He didn't need her to be Meryl Streep the actress. He just needed her to be Mary Louise, the woman she'd been before fame complicated everything. With him, she could stop performing. She could be messy and sad and uncertain. She could grieve honestly instead of gracefully. The photograph from that party stayed in its box. She'd look at it sometimes over the years, that image of herself smiling and radiant and completely hollow. It reminded her of a version of herself she'd almost become, the woman who was so good at pretending that the pretending became real. The woman who prioritized image over authenticity, success over sanity, career over self. She'd pulled back from that edge. Barely, but she had. Her career didn't end because she started setting boundaries. That's what surprised her most. The industry had always told her that saying no meant career death, that you had to strike while the iron was hot, that opportunities didn't come twice. But it turned out that being selective made her more valuable, not less. Directors wanted to work with her because she only took roles that challenged her. Audiences trusted her performances because she only did work that mattered to her. She won her first Oscar in 1980 for Kramer vs. Kramer. Won her second in 1983 for Sophie's Choice. The awards were meaningful, but they weren't everything. They were validation of her work, not validation of her worth. She'd learned the difference. Over the decades, as her career grew and her legend solidified, people started talking about her as though success had come easily. As though she'd always been confident, always been certain, always known exactly who she was and what she wanted. The photograph in the box told a different story. It told the story of a woman who almost lost herself to the performance of being herself. A woman who learned, slowly and painfully, that the most important role she'd ever play was the one no one saw, the private self she protected from the demands of fame. She shared the photograph once, years later, with her daughter when her daughter was struggling with pressure and expectations and the weight of being Meryl Streep's child. They sat together on Meryl's bed, the small wooden box open between them, and Meryl told her the truth about that night. About the party and the performance and the profound loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw your surface. "You looked so happy," her daughter said, studying the image. "That's what scared me most," Meryl replied. "That I was so good at faking it that I couldn't tell the difference anymore." Her daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "How did you find your way back?" Meryl thought about it. About dawn and boundaries and saying no. About choosing theater over film sometimes. About moving to Connecticut instead of staying in Los Angeles. About all the small decisions that added up to a life she could live with instead of a life that looked good from the outside. "I stopped trying to be who everyone wanted me to be," she said finally. "I started being honest about what I could and couldn't do. What I would and wouldn't accept. I stopped performing my life and started living it." It was simple advice, but it had taken her years to learn. Years of therapy and grief and mistakes and hard conversations. Years of disappointing people who wanted more from her than she had to give. Years of choosing presence over perfection, authenticity over approval. The photograph stayed in the box. Evidence of a moment she survived, a version of herself she'd outgrown. She didn't need to share it with the world. The world had enough images of Meryl Streep, on red carpets and magazine covers and movie posters. This one was just for her. A reminder that the woman everyone saw was real, but she was also more than that. Complicated. Vulnerable. Human. She'd built a remarkable career. Won 3 Oscars and been nominated for 21. Played roles that would be studied for generations. Became a legend, an icon, the standard by which all other actors are measured. But her greatest achievement wasn't any of that. Her greatest achievement was keeping the photograph hidden. Was protecting the messy, uncertain, grieving human underneath the flawless image. Was refusing to let success destroy her. Was learning that you can be extraordinary in public and ordinary in private, and the ordinary part is actually more important. Meryl Streep survived 1978. Survived the grief and the pressure and the parties where she had to smile like she meant it. She survived by learning when to perform and when to stop performing. By building a life with boundaries and priorities and people who loved her for reasons that had nothing to do with her talent. By choosing to be whole instead of just successful, present instead of just perfect. That photograph, hidden in a box in her bedroom, is proof that she didn't just survive. She figured out how to live. How to be great at her work without letting her work consume her. How to be famous without losing her private self. How to build a legend while remaining human. And maybe that's the real story worth telling. Not the awards or the acclaim or the iconic roles. But the photograph she keeps hidden. The moment of false happiness that taught her what real happiness actually required. The smile that looked so convincing it scared her into becoming someone more honest than the image suggested. Meryl Streep keeps that photograph hidden because it reminds her of what she almost became and what she chose to be instead. And that choice, quiet and private and witnessed by no one, is the most powerful performance of her life.